Welcome to Slightly Off Script, the marriage show where we remind you that marriage can be stupid good and wicked fun. I'm one of your hosts, Bethany Needham.
The most amazing wife in the world.
Oh, cut me off. With my co-host, the most incredible, beyond comprehension.
Doesn't fit. That doesn't fit on the mug. World's best dad or whatever.
Yes, it's not going to fit on a mug, but I think you're pretty awesome. I'm just throwing it out there. Andrew David Needham.
Oh, geez. So here we go. Back to that. That's great. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling fantastic.
2025.
2025 for real. We're
into it
that.
now.
Yeah,
Time goes fast. It's pretty amazing.
I've been pretty thrown off. I have to write dates a lot at work, like
a
filling.
millennial.
Yes, I'm constantly writing the date. But every time I'm like, are you kidding me? It's like so much later than it's just flying by.
Yeah, it's like the 20s are middle aged now.
Yeah. For real.
Mid-20s.
Yeah, we're about to retire. That's what's going to happen.
All right. I have a question for you.
I'm nervous, but I'm ready.
I don't think this should be making you nervous, but I'm curious. This is going to challenge your memory.
Oh, well, good luck. I didn't take my ADHD
right.
meds today, so.
I've been able to think about it ahead. So
all right.
I will help you.
Perfect. I like hints, but let's go.
Do you recall
Yes.
a terrible date that we had?
Oh, do I recall a That's a good question.
Thank you.
That I'm nervous to answer. What if I give you a terrible date and you're like,
I thought I crushed it.
that was my favorite date ever. Terrible date that we had. I feel
You want me to go first?
Yeah,
So
could you?
Okay.
I'm bombing here.
All right. We lived in Metro West Boston,
Okay.
and I think we had gone to the mall. Remember those?
It's already starting.
The Natick Mall.
No, the Natick Collection.
Well, that's a funny story because they renamed it for a while. It's actually back to being the Natick Mall. They realized how pretentious that name was.
They gave up.
They gave up on that. So we were coming back from that, and we're like, hey, we've never gone to this Asian restaurant. Why don't we go there and get some sushi? And so it was
Yes.
we did not like look on Yelp or anything like that. We're like, yeah, there's some cars in the driveway. Let's just go check this out. And so we go in there, and it was a little weird. Like there was a big dance floor, and like we got a booth. There were a couple people there, but it was pretty dead.
But wait, the bouncer, before we even
Oh,
went in.
you are right.
Yeah.
That should have been a tip off.
We should have turned back around.
Yeah. Are people really like aiming to get into this very quiet
Sushi
restaurant?
We're like, what is happening?
And I think, again, that was mistake one. Mistake two was that we ordered like a full, like, we're going big. We're going to do the sushi boat.
Yes.
And we ordered the sushi boat, which is like a boat. Like, it's like this big thing. And we spent more money than we probably should have on not great sushi.
I remember being terrible.
It was terrible sushi. Okay.
Yeah.
So strike two, bouncer, bad sushi. And then do you remember the third strike?
I have a vague recollection of this turning quickly from a sushi restaurant to a club.
Yes.
Like it was like the lights went down, the music just cranking, and the crowd switching over real fast. And I was like,
Explain the bouncer. That explained the bouncer.
That was my first thought was, okay, the bouncer makes more sense.
Yeah, we accidentally went clubbing.
Yeah, and
Not our crowd.
Weren't good at it. We were like, pay the bill. Let's get out of here quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even like a cool vibe. It was super
It was
sketchy.
super weird.
Yeah.
And I have to say, like, we were younger at that time, but I love music, but I've definitely entered the era of life where if like I am at a restaurant and a band shows up, I'm like, check please. Like, I don't want to be like, I'm going to lean over. My hearing is already getting bad.
Yes.
Like now the one dude playing John Mayer songs all day long on acoustic guitar, like I'm in for that. But
yeah. We are not the people, like, we go to a place and a DJ starts setting up and we're like, peace.
Bye.
Like, this is not happening right now. Yeah, it's bad. In fact, I think part of why we love the deals like half price sushi, whatever, like half price
Before that
appetizer
starts.
is because we're much more like, if we're gonna go out for dinner, we need to be eating by 5, okay? Like We're not sitting down at 6. Somebody tells me like, let's meet for dinner at 7 o'clock. Are you insane?
Are we getting ready for breakfast?
Yeah, like no, that's bedtime.
Yeah.
And so no, that actually I'm putting that one on the list because as soon as you mentioned Metro West, I'm not just saying this to get out of answering. That was the date that
Yeah.
came to mind. And so yeah, that one's going down the books. That one was weird and the food was terrible. But I'm sure we've had other bad dates. They're not the things that come to mind immediately. So I would say any dates that we've had that for whatever reason like end in a fight. Have you ever had those where you're like, well, you have because you were with me. Have you ever had
No,
those?
apparently you have. I don't remember.
That's me, my other husband. No, but you're on a date and for whatever reason something happens and you end up the date ends in like a fight and you're just grumpy and that's the worst.
Well, we tend to have, I think decision fatigue is another one where you're like not sure what to do
Yeah.
and you like didn't make a plan. That's why like we've like over time, this is a change for us. Now you do most of the driving, which wasn't true in our early
Yeah.
marriage. But part of that is that I can be in concierge mode.
Yes. Yeah.
I can be the DJ.
Yes. I will stay for that DJ.
Well, you get to try. We always have the rule that if you're the driver, you get the extra vote on what to listen to. So,
True. Very
but then I
true.
can be like plotting out the plan for where we're gonna go and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, we've had hit and miss at different times. You know what I love though? And something I appreciate that we are both this way is we're not afraid to try new
Yeah.
things. We are adventurous, especially with restaurants and food. We are not the people that pull in and we're like, where's the local Applebee's? Like,
No,
I want to try something. I want to try local food. And that doesn't always pan out to being like,
you don't want a Dollarita.
no, I don't want your Dollarita. And we've had big wins in that where we're like,
Yeah.
that was amazing. And then we've had ones where like, well,
That's a story now.
yep, we tried that.
I did think of something that we have thought about though in our travel, and this is actually a pretty recent one.
Oh,
Was that I don't remember where we were traveling.
wait,
You
have
might-
we resolved this or is this going to start?
well,
a
we'll
fight?
find out in a moment.
It's fine. We're talking about conflict. It's perfect.
So we were traveling somewhere, and typically the GPS of choice in our family is Waze.
Oh, yes. Okay.
But sometimes when you're navigating, especially if you make quick decisions, like especially on the iPhone, it'll default, if you click through a link, it'll default to Apple Maps.
Yes. Which I
And
hate.
she hates Apple Maps.
Sorry, I'm just going to put it out there. Freaking hate Apple Maps. Do not sponsor us. I will not stand behind your.
And well, it was a tense situation. We were trying to navigate a city or something that we weren't normally in. And that was not a side of you that I see very often, but that strong opinion on GPS.
Yeah. Okay. Now that
It was Providence. It was Providence actually, which I was just in recently, but we were trying to navigate around that.
Oh, and their roads and highways.
it's
Come on,
unbelievable.
Providence, get it together. No, honestly. So here's the thing, because now you've outed me, so I'm just gonna own it. I am not typically a very like high strung, lose my temper, but there is something like for me. There's more than one thing, but this thing I know of myself,
Okay.
and I have not resolved it. I'm just gonna is if I am in a place I don't know.
Yep.
And it is dark. That's the key is like, I think it's a vision issue. I don't know. Something about it being after dark and
After 7 o'clock
after 7
or
o'clock.
4:30 this
Yes.
time of year.
And so I'm in a place I don't know. It's dark and anything other than like a GPS that I know, my stress level immediately is like through the roof. I don't know what it is that I don't know the roads. I don't like, there's something about Apple Maps. It's just not super clear. And I hate that. I want clarity. I want my GPS to mansplain so obnoxiously that I cannot doubt for a second that, what is it, Google, whatever one that literally is be like, you go through this at the second light, turn right. Like it's literally, it should be called the mansplain GPS because I'm like, I can see it in front of me. You don't. But when I'm in a place I don't know, I want that much description.
Well, you also
and
want I think the bigger thing for you is you want the view that you're used. Like it's more the.
I need to look down and know quickly what is going on. For the record, you throw rain into that mix, and I am Satan's offspring right there. Like
we're already sort of entering that time where you debate if it's raining and dark whether you're going to go out, but I'm just telling you, like 5 to 10 years from now, like just know the Needhams will
Will
not be
not be
trapped.
out after dark. If it's raining,
Or if
no way.
we're at your house, then you hope you have a spare bedroom. So.
Can be a can be a revival going on down the street, and we will stay with Jesus in our home. Thank you very much.
All right. So today we're going to talk. We've been doing this series on conflict, and we're going to do part 3, which we think is probably the last part of it.
We're resolving all of
We're
it
going to
right
solve all the
now.
problems. So our first week on conflict, if you go back a couple episodes, episode 10, we talked about the ground floor, how there are things in our lives that we need to take inventory of that may be below the surface. And we come to a relationship with those things and they will present themselves. And we need to get to the point where we are healthy. There's a starting point for conflict. And that really ultimately is the gospel, the foot of the cross. And we shared our story about how that has worked out in our life. And then last week we did an episode. It was a real fun episode, but we talked about some really pragmatic, practical kind of just boots on the ground
Yep.
in the midst of the conflict. And today we're going to look at it from sort of the same thing, but look at it from a different angle. And that is going to be answering 2 questions. First of all, how do we cultivate healthy conflict in the ordinary everyday? So normal life. And then second, we'll talk about what do we do in the midst of a crisis?
Yes.
That is either something that could be something outside of our marriage, because there are sometimes realities of loss or trauma or difficulty or whatever it be. And we'll talk a little about some of those things that are external to your marriage, but they impact your marriage and they will impact your conflict. And then second, there can be things within your relationship. One of you or both of you are going through something. So so that's kind of the roadmap for today.
Yeah, I think honestly, this episode is kind of that recognition that not all conflict is made the same and it's
No.
not resolved the same. And one of the first discerning steps is what level of conflict are we actually dealing with and applying the right tools and the right whatever to that versus either catastrophizing everything and making everything a major conflict or minimizing and making it not enough of a not enough of a conflict sounds bad, but like that we're not addressing it at the level it needs to be addressed. So yeah.
Well said. So you came up with a word picture, as you do.
As I do. It's how I learn.
So how do you want to think about these 2 types of conflict, the conflict in the everyday and the conflict that is not everyday? It's more the extremes of life.
We do not live in Florida, but if you do live in Florida, we'll just use Florida as the example. It's the difference between when you live in Florida, thunderstorms, rainstorms, that's kind of, you never know, day to day. Those are regular occurrences. And there are ways that you respond to those kind of storms.
Yep.
But then there's hurricanes and hurricane season, and that is a very different level of response and also different threat level. And so we want to talk through the difference between a conflict that would be more in terms of an everyday storm and then those conflicts that arise that are hurricane level storms. And what do the responses look like? How do they differ? And also, I would just say being intentional that we're not responding in a minimizing way to everyday storms that make everyday storms build to hurricane levels. Or the flip side, that we're not catastrophizing everyday storms in a way that turns everyday storms into constant hurricanes.
That's really well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk. We'll start with the everyday. And the question being, how do we cultivate healthy conflict in the ordinary, as we've said before, the mundane, the normal parts of life? Much of life is very unspectacular.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Well, I think we were talking about this picture of a house in maintenance mode, and we're in the house we're at now because we've been in it for a number of years. And there is this side of an everyday response that's a little bit like that, checking your house for those maintenance issues. We're talking like smaller issues, but like maybe water spots on a ceiling, things that could be really little things if they're dealt with in a good amount of time. But if left unattended or if ignored, they can actually become much bigger issues. We had this when we first moved into the house and we had the spot on the ceiling in the kitchen. Do you remember that? And our response to it was to paint roll. We're like, oh.
Well, hold on a second. We asked the home inspector if it was an active issue or not. And they said this was an old water stain.
Yes.
So we assumed incorrectly there was not an active issue.
But our first response was to paint over it. But then after doing that, we realized that it was reappearing, and which was to us this sign of, okay, there is an active issue that needs to be addressed. And we brought in a plumber, and it really wasn't this wasn't the whole ceiling rotted out. It was this sort of small issue. We were able to deal with it pretty minimally. And so it was sort of a response early on when we saw symptoms of it that kept it at that level versus if we just kept paint rolling over it because we didn't like looking at the spot over time, that could have started rotting out joints and things of that nature. So,
Yeah. And as you get to know a property, like we live on a hill, one of the things in this property that I've become very aware of, you talk about inside the house, but outside the house is water. And they've done a good job with the landscaping overall to direct the water away from the house and stuff like that. But I've learned a lot. We had an area where water was pooling, and I had to try to figure out a solution for that. And water is one of those things that it doesn't cause an issue today. It's that slow decay. And we had an issue with our deck where a certain flow of water had grabbed a board and it was starting to rot out. And the deck was not falling over. It's a beautiful deck. It's not that old. But this one beam was having an issue this year. Like I was like, we have to take care of that issue. And because if we don't, it could be something where we are spending thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to replace an entire deck. And we were able to find somebody who was able to replace it for hundreds of dollars.
yeah.
And so I think that's a good, either one of those things, painting over the water spots inside or ignoring the rotting board. In some ways, that is the day-to-day work. And, those are not either one of those things. Like you said, on one hand, it's not a small issue. On the other hand, we had to get outside help. We had to find somebody who had more expertise than us. But these were not like massive, even in terms of dollars, types of things
Yeah.
to repair. So,
Yeah, practically speaking, that could be anything in your marriage and, busy season of life or whatever. And we've had times where I'll throw myself under the bus on this one where busyness happens and I start ignoring things around the house that my intention isn't necessarily to pile those things on you, but you work from home a lot. So I get to go to work. I don't have to look at it all day. You're at home looking at this all day. And so it's creating sort of this tension between us of, it's really not a huge thing, but if you don't come to me and articulate like, hey, the story I'm telling myself is that,
Christmas was over a long time ago. That's not a conflict. You're going to take care of that stuff today.
Yeah.
So, just kidding.
today. But there's a side of it where like actually just having the conversation and being like, hey, I know things work is busy or whatever, but when these things get left, it communicates that that it's just all on me, that I gotta carry all of this. And when we address it, it actually, for us anyways, I feel like this is something we've grown in where me being able to acknowledge like, oh man, I definitely don't want to communicate that. I want to be helpful and coming easy kind of one conversation solution versus you just start doing everything, you start getting bitter, resentful, it starts to build and and I don't know what's going on. I'm feeling it off of you. And that's what I would say the difference between actually addressing what you're seeing and paint rolling over it.
Yeah, so that's sort of the different. I'd say the other side of that analogy, though, is like I mentioned that there's a particular terrain to our property and to our house, and very different from our last home, in terms of age of the house and the property and all of those things. And so, in a similar way, the way a storm is going to impact you is based on the terrain of what your life looks like today, like what stage and age and, where your kids are at in terms of life and the number of commitments that you have and are both of you working and what does that look like? And that is sort of to me like the land that you live on and the reality of that. And so part of the grace that you have to have for yourselves is to understand, we can see this easier now, having gone through multiple seasons. You can look back and say, oh, those storms impacted us in a unique way because the terrain that we were dealing with was a lot more complex or had these unique factors to them.
Yeah.
Somebody not being healthy or, that kind of thing. We can kind of paint a little bit of a utopian photo of this. And there are marriages that are walking through and they're like, why is every single little storm challenging this house?
Yeah.
And you need to ask good questions when you feel like every conflict feels like it's a big deal. But the grace you have to give yourself is like, oh, we are dealing with some tough terrain.
Yeah. I think too, just being aware and acknowledging the terrain also helps you to determine what are the tools and solutions that are actually helpful for you in that time. Because you, for instance, in this terrain in this house, dug this, was it called a French drain or whatever? So you put all this effort into this French drain, which for our terrain and the issue that we were having, it actually created a solution to this water buildup, right? Well, at our old house, you could have dug 12 French drains. It didn't match the terrain. It wasn't the solution for that terrain. And so that's one of those things where sometimes we can get marriage advice that's like, yeah, that's all well and good, but that doesn't work in my terrain. And so just being aware that sometimes you do have to get creative and be honest about what things look like. And, those everyday stressors, again, we don't have little kids running around. That's a different stress. And so you may have to think through where you and I have this freedom to have these small conversations. If we had little kids running around, we'd have to think that through a little more of like,
Yeah, there's different pressures though, because I wasn't worried about FAFSA when our kids were
yeah, no, it's
11
so
years
true.
old. So yeah, it's not like it's better or worse. It's just different. And so we talked about this a little bit last week, but I'd be curious for you when you think about the everyday, there are things that we just have to overlook and ignore.
Yeah.
And then there are things that we need to say, oh, we really need to sit down and talk about this. We talked about the concept of patterns being one of the things that would probably raise something to a repeating issue. If I have a pool of water in my yard once, maybe that was just a unique storm. If I have a pool of water every single time it rains, that's a different situation. I need to address it.
Yeah.
Is there anything that comes to your mind that helps you kind of process with all of my dysfunctions and all of my sin? Having been tested thoroughly in this
On this
area,
matter. Oh gosh.
the queen of quirks.
Okay, stop. Okay. So for me, when I'm thinking about being careful not to over respond or like ignore, discerning between those things. One, honestly, for me is to the self-reflection. There are some times when something comes up, it could even be something that you said that in that moment it hit a nerve,
Yeah.
it whatever it was, but it actually, when I take time to self-reflect, I recognize that the reason it hit a nerve was because maybe that day I was feeling very insecure about something, I was feeling sensitive about something, I was already angry about something. You did not walk into that trying to kick the landmine.
Yeah.
So in those moments, recognizing like, gosh, your intention and like, I can let that go because a lot of it is just stuff that I just need to recognize in myself. I can't remember the specifics, but we had a conversation recently. I felt like this played out in a really healthy way where we had a conversation. I was realizing and recognizing like, oh gosh, I am seeing why this is such a hot button for me. And I was able to kind of play the tape out that helped. But also, I felt like you were wow, it's helpful for me to know that you were walking through that because
Yes.
I had no idea. It's not ignoring because you're like, whatever. It's more like, this actually has more to do with me than it does the conflict between, whatever you said or did.
Good.
And then the not over responding, I would say also a stepping back to be like, in the grand scheme of things, even am I over responding because my emotion level, I'm exhausted, I'm whatever, and it's just amping this that is way out of line with what is actually, and I need to take a minute to cool, not to ignore it. Like maybe it is something that
Yes.
needs to be addressed, but let's address it at the level that it's actually at, not throwing in all of my hormone imbalances and whatever else to the mix.
So the only thing I would add to that is I like the word overlook better than ignore because I think ignore implies sort of like this, like, I don't know, turning away. And
Yeah.
overlook is like, I see this, but I'm choosing not to respond to it.
Yeah.
So that'd be one thing. And you kind of touched on this just a little bit, but we've had many times as we've grown in our marriage where we have gotten to a point, sometimes it's because a conflict comes up and we're just like, hey, let's just acknowledge we're kind of out of sync right now. Like there's just something, I don't know
Yeah.
why we're just not in the same headspace. We're not in the same energy. We're just not we're not grooving right now.
Yeah.
So let's just acknowledge that. And, you know, the beauty of marriage is you get time. So it's like, that's okay. It's okay to not be okay. You don't have to stay there.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really good one. We've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes. You know, there's the bad side of patterns, like a pattern of a bad behavior. I think it's also paying attention to the patterns of when you have conflict.
Yes. This is huge because I think what it allows is the opportunity to actually build strategies and things that help in that pattern. So I'll give a very specific example. We were talking about this with my new work schedule and you're starting a new job. One of the things is I was recognizing there's one day a week that I'm in staff meetings. It's a long stretch of time, and I have noticed this pattern on that particular day that it is a next level brain dead for me coming home. That day happened to align with when you traveled this last time. And it was one of these recognizing this, okay, I don't want to create a pattern where this is the day I'm always grumpy when I come home,
Yep.
that nothing ever gets done. Like that could be a pattern if I don't stop to recognize it. And instead, we both were like, okay, what could be a strategy in recognizing that this is true? And anything from like, let's lower our expectations of our time together that night. Like it could be that's a night where you just need to come home, drink some tea, and go to bed. And that's okay. Like it's, again, play the long game. This is.
Yep.
Or what if maybe that's a crock pot day where dinner's already ready when you come through the door, whatever it is. But I think recognizing patterns, not just to harp on, well, this is not this always happens or whatever, but how do you actually use that to create strategy so you're not repeating that same, even though it's a small thing, like you're not repeating that same small thing over and over.
I think a lot of conflict happens when there's an external stressor. So like you mentioned, like a long day of work, and then the transitions. So
yes,
so-and-so comes home from work. The other person's been with the little kids all day long, and we're just, again, out of sync. So how do we get into sync and setting expectations together and paying a lot of attention? Like I remember when you were working at the church, like Sundays were often 10, 15 hours. So we had to calibrate our expectations around those realities. Is there anything else in terms of everyday storms, healthy conflict in the ordinary? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things.
I'm sure there's more but I feel like that gives kind of a picture of things for us that kind of came to mind when we think about those that is it. This is everyday stuff. And that's why the overlooking things is an important part of it, because if every thunderstorm you're batting down the hatches like a hurricane's coming, like if you live
exhausting.
in Florida, you're going to be doing that every single afternoon.
But you do build your house in a different way if you live in that terrain. So that's part of what we're talking about too. So, but then there are times when we are in a crisis, and that could be a crisis that, again, there could be an external reality, or it could be something within our home. And for us, a lot of the last decade, some of that was things that our kids were walking through that were very real and serious. And God did a lot of good work and was very gracious to our kids, and we're really proud of them. At the same time, these were types of things that can easily attack the fabric of your marriage. And then there's been other times where one of us has been unhealthy, and we'll talk a little bit more about, like, there's different reasons that can be true.
Yeah.
Some you can control, some you can't. These are when it's real, like it's on. This is not a little thunderstorm.
No. Yeah. And sometimes this needs a third party in the conversation.
Yeah.
This is not just coming face to face and creating an easy strategy. Like the hurricane's in and this is life or death. Like we need to really life or death of the relationship in a lot of ways, like thinking of it that way, responding in that way. And yeah, I think you're right. I think there's the external side, the things that we just have no control over that happen. And then there is the internal part of our marriage. And I think that has both aspects. There's things you can't control that are part of that. And then there are things that are within our control. So
how do we prepare ourselves for
that? It's funny because the word picture and thinking of people living in Florida, and there are some things that they have that are funny for me to think about because we don't even think about them here.
The people in Florida, like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not going to start listing because they will mock.
They don't have
But
any snow blowers, I can tell you that much.
I was going to say, it's maybe how we get ready for like a nor'easter. But there's certain things that are just you have in place, hoping you never have to use it, but it's there if you do. And we've mentioned the 2 a.m. friends is one of those things that I would put, that you have the people in your life, the relationships that exist, that when a hurricane comes, you're not looking up numbers, you're not Googling, best marriage therapist, like that you have those people that I can go to these people immediately. Like they're in my Rolodex. I'm going way back on that one.
What's a Rolodex?
Yeah. But
You
they're
can
there.
send them a fax.
No, but I think that's one of them is like having the people in place, and then a plan in place. I think about when, one of our kids lives in Florida, and there was a storm. We had like a few storms that rolled in, but there was a point where the only response was actually they needed to evacuate to a sheltered area. They needed to get out of the eye of the storm while the storm passed so that they could then return.
The path of the storm. The eye is the peaceful part.
Oh, yes, the path of the storm.
So you're showing that
I know.
We probably should have done blizzard, but we picked hurricane, so we're just going to stick with it at this point.
I think it's better if we make ourselves look dumb.
Yeah, that's great.
So make our listeners smart and we sound dumb.
So let's talk about the within our marriage part. We have walked through many examples of this when one of us was in a place of unhealth. Again, that could be something that is within our control, or it could be something that is outside of our control. So maybe you could color that a little bit.
Yeah. One of the ones that comes to mind is I have been open. I don't know how much on this podcast, but in general, I'm fairly open that I battled with different mental illness, depression, and anxiety. And one of the times when that was really fierce was after the birth of our daughter. And I experienced postpartum depression, essentially. And it was not something that was in my control, but it absolutely affected our family. And I would say that 2 a.m. friend for us at this time was putting an emergency call to my mom at the time. And for us, the response to that was we needed external help to step in because, as much as both of us wanted a healthy marriage, we wanted, like, this was creating legitimate, like, this was not a healthy environment. I know you desired to help, but you also had this pressure of you had to continue working full time. You had 2 little kids, and now your wife was basically not functioning. And so I think my mom actually came and lived with us for a little bit to help work through things, but that was a season that had doctors involved. And I don't know from your side, I'm just from my side, these were kind of bringing in those people. And in a weird way, I'll throw in that evacuation to shelter thing. One of the things that was given to us in that season where they sent you and I away for a little bit just to actually have time alone, the 2 of us. It wasn't about ignoring the problem. It was actually giving us some space to work through the healing of it, because it gave us these days where we didn't have 2 little kids like who were in constant need. And so I think in some ways, all of those things played a part in that season. It took time, and it took probably all of our resources working through that hurricane season, having the people, the place, the space, all of it.
Yeah, and there's been times when I've been the one on the other side, but I know for me, when especially this is particularized to the depression and then my temperament, my desire was to be the fixer. I think I was motivated by love, but it was not the solution to the problem. And so I think of it like if I was trying to dig a French drain in the middle of a hurricane, it's like, this is not the time for like to get the hammer and this is not that moment. And so
right heart, wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong solution.
I did that plenty of times. And so when you're the one who is dealing with that, it's just something to consider. So,
yeah. Do you have any that come to mind for you in terms of the internal, whether in control or out of control?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, like for me as a young man, pornography was something that really gripped my heart. And that's something that I feel like, again, the control of that over my life has not been constant, but it's one of those things that the roots can pop up at different times, and that has happened. And I've, again, like we do, I try to do when the storm's not brewing, create the systems and the gates and the people and the processes and the filters and all that kind of stuff. But that's been one that, we've had, I think a lot of couples walk through that. I mean, just culture, frankly, it's like, it's kind of hard. You have to choose to avoid these things in today's culture. It was not like it was 50 years ago. The one similarity between depression and something like porn, that they're very different in terms of like one is a choice and one's not.
Right.
Depression you can choose. But the thing that is true of both of them, and this is one of the things that causes conflict in marriages, I didn't understand depression and you didn't understand my struggles.
Yeah.
And so when there's that massive gap and like, how is this a thing? And the gap of understanding is so vast. That is a very difficult, like it's a very real thing. And there is a part of living with another human with all their dysfunctions, both the ones that are because we're in a sinful world and because we are sinful people, that we are going to have these gaps in understanding with each other, whether it's a dysfunction that we chose or not. Anything you want to add to that?
I would say, one, I think that's a really clear picture. Like it resonates, but I also would layer onto that highlights the importance of having people outside your marriage. Because at least in both of those instances, my experience was the gap in understanding in the heat of those moments. I was not going to learn that from you about pornography, and you were not going to hear it from me about depression. But in the area of depression, when my mom stepped in, I actually remember, which is funny because that was honestly kind of a foggy time for me, but I do remember her sitting down with you and explaining listen, I know it's frustrating for you that she can't make the most simple decisions. Like but let me explain to you what's going on. Like, and she was very much giving you what I couldn't. I knew I was struggling, but I didn't know how to articulate. And there was just more frustration than anything else. And I felt like having that outside person come in and be a voice to that. And then the flip side with the pornography, I have a very, very clear image. You want to talk about a monumental moment in our marriage where that gap of understanding had me ready to call it. Like it felt impossible. I was not hearing it from you. And it was a dear friend that I called in this friend to be like, come and, we are women, hear us roar. Like, I want your backing on this. And she very lovingly stepped into that and said, listen, first of all, I understand, like I've walked through this in my own marriage, which I always think there's something so powerful when someone's willing to kind of meet you in that place. But she said the words like, the thing that I had to learn was first and foremost that my husband's, his struggle or his addiction, whatever you want to call it, to pornography is actually not about me. And as like simple as that seems, it broke something in that gap of understanding for me that helped me to be able to look at you again with compassion and love and empathy and sort of in a desire to want to come back together. And so,
but also not to be this, like, you're also not this, just like I'm not the solution to your depression. It's not your responsibility. Like there's a grace and a kindness. There is a responsibility that we have as a spouse.
Yeah.
But the responsibility is not to be the solution. Like we've often said, like the world already has a savior and I'm not it and you're not it. And what do I say to you all the time? What's my line?
Fold your cape.
Fold your cape.
Well, and again, both of those scenarios, exactly what you just said. My mom came, she spoke into that. She closed that gap. But one of the things that she also said was to me was, I'm going to be here, but here's what you need to do. And the understanding was she was there to help. She helped communicate between us, but I had to go see a doctor. Like that was you have to make this appointment and go. And when we walked through the pornography stuff, it was like, no, this is not about me. Also, it's not on me to figure this out for you, but you have to go speak to somebody. Like I want somebody else in this.
Well, there's like when a hurricane hits a house, there's the triage phase where it's like, okay, how do we make sure everybody's safe? Like, let's just make sure there's a building going to fall down, like that kind of level.
Yeah.
And then there's like, okay, then there's sort of the rebuilding. And
Yes.
then also like reevaluating, like, okay, if you rebuild the house, maybe we're going to do something we're going to build a little differently because now we have a different understanding of the
Mm-hmm.
type of storms that maybe we're prone to
Yeah.
in our reality. So yeah. So that's internal. I mean, we could talk, there's other challenges that we have faced, but I think a lot of people walk through those two things that we just described. And there's hope for you if that's what you're walking through. There's freedom. But in terms of external conflict, like I think I just have this clear memory of when we first moved to Metro West Boston was right when the housing market crashed and a lot of people in our church got laid off and a lot of marriages fell apart
Hmm.
in that church, people that we love and care about, and we were serving their children. And the thing that I think what I kind of came to in that situation is like these external stressors, you know, financial crisis reveal the lack of foundation.
Hmm.
Like that issue is significant. I don't want to make light of it because for some people it was like, am I going to be able to keep my home? Like, you know, that's not small. At the same time, that was not going to destroy the marriage unless there was already pre-existing issues there.
Yeah.
So, so one message is to make sure that you're doing the maintenance. But we've walked through some really hard external storms. Any insight or things that you would do differently or that you've learned?
I think the external storms, the things that come to mind is they often do reveal. They can reveal cracks in the foundation. Like what you think about a storm hitting a house, if there's a place for water to get in, it's going to find its
Yep.
way. And so not ignoring those. And it can be easier, like in the extreme, like when the storm's hitting, you see that. But the temptation is when it seems like it's letting up, you just sort of like, okay, whatever. Well, it's not leaking in now, so we're not going to worry about it. And I would just say in the external storms, I do think there are times, like you said, there's the triage of it where when you're in the storm, external that's coming in. There are certain parts of that that you're navigating that it's not the time to necessarily fix that leak. You may have something temporarily to put there,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say it's important to take note of that because when you're able to get beyond the triage, the opportunity now to go back and like do those repairs, like take the time to dig into those things and do the work because the storm, there's going to be another storm. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's going to, now I have Miley Cyrus running through my head.
Oh, so there's going to be another mountain as well.
Yeah. But no, I think just taking the time to rebuild and repair and in the storm, that idea of sort of the shelter in place is what
Mm-hmm.
comes to mind. But what does it look like in your marriage? Because we've been through things, especially through with our kids in mental health, where a lot of what we needed to do was just shelter in place and love each other, support each other, a lot of grace and not the time for us. Like, again, this isn't even the overlooking thing. This is more of the some things needed us to put a pin in it because we just needed to deal with what we were in the middle of and come back to late, once we get beyond the worst of the storm and actually work through some of those things.
Just one thing to add to that, the other side of the coin, one of the dangerous things to do, though, is to make the crisis the new normal
Yes.
and to allow, now, again, everybody's situation is unique. So I want to say this with a lot of love, grace, and understanding that each situation and complex. But there were times, even with our own kids, where we have had to have conversations where we said, look, if you can't be safe and be here for everybody's sake, then we're going to have to think about what life looks like. You cannot allow those external situations to undermine what God has built. And it's easy to do because it's usually very well intentioned.
Yep.
It usually seems like the gracious thing to do, but it can be the thing that destroys a marriage.
Yeah. You have to be willing to put hard boundaries to protect your marriage as much as
Yeah.
anything
Well, you've
else.
seen that a lot as you've walked into this world where you're dealing with people all the time in recovery and addiction. I remember you shared a podcast with me of somebody who had turned their life around. And one of the things they pointed to, they had been the kid that got kicked out. They were the person that, and they said, when my parents were enabling the situation, it wasn't actually love. But when they finally said, we're done, we're not giving you any more money, we're not, like, we love you, but we can't even have you We cannot be in active relationship right now. That was one of the things that actually turned that person around. It was a real hard love.
Yeah.
And, I know we heard it's great when there's a beautiful story and it's like, it all turns around and God does his work, but that's not always the outcome that people get either. So I have a lot of grace in that. That's what I'm saying is very true and very hard.
Yes. Sometimes when the hurricane is so severe, you actually should not be sheltering in place. And that's where I get to that sort of evacuation, safe house.
Maybe relocation.
Maybe relocation. There are times where actually the best and healthiest thing you can do for your marriage is to step away from that storm together. And, for us, sometimes that has just been, it's looked like a vacation that wasn't necessarily about like, woohoo, vacation, but like you and I need to get out of the environment to come together to sort of regroup, whatever it is. And then again, the long term, most times it's to return, to go back, rebuild and repair. But to shelter in place when the hurricane is about to wipe your house out. And ultimately, like what you actually need to do is be willing to walk away, trust God with the house, and then return after some time. So, yeah.
But to bring it full circle to our first conversation, this is why having the foundation of Christ is so key. The gospel is the foundation, because all these other things, a broken window, a blown off roof, you can get over that's a severe loss. But if your foundation's cracked or if it's broken, that's where, that's more than maintenance. That's really like the deep work that you need to do. And sometimes, again, like you said, storms reveal those things. And, you may be married for decades and you're discovering now, and sometimes it's going to be the most devastating thing, especially in the other person, if you feel like you've walked in trust and you discover something. So yeah, this has been a great conversation, Bethany.
Yeah. Honestly, and not that anyone loves talking about conflict, but I'm grateful for the people who wrote in and asked the questions, because I think again, the whole idea of stupid good and wicked fun is not about conflict avoidance. Like, part of how you experience that in a real authentic way is by working through your conflict and growing through it. And honestly, some of it coming out the other side with more things to laugh about because of the good, the bad, the ugly of what comes with conflict. So,
and there's always restaurants with DJs that we can
that we can walk out of.
It was a sandstorm is the song, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's great. Well, this has been awesome. I think for now, this is I imagine if we keep doing this, we're going to talk about conflict more in the future. But I think this has been a really good entry into the conversation. It's been fun for me just to kind of process this out loud and see some of the things that God has done, the work that he's done in us and through us. And that's been really awesome. So thanks for all the grace that you've shown me. And
I'll ditto. I feel like this has made it sound like you're the one that's always, this is very much a mutual conflict marriage. So no, I'm also very grateful for the grace that you've shown me. And I'm grateful that we're in this together. And through daily storms or hurricanes, ride or die.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for listening. We look forward to being back with you next week. And thanks for all the subscribing, the following, the liking. The reviews are huge. But honestly, one of the biggest things is if you share this with other people. That goes a long way. And so if this has been helpful to you, let us know. If there's other things you want us to talk about, please feel free to write in on that. We're looking forward to coming up in just a couple weeks. We have our first live podcast recording in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. And we will look forward to seeing you guys next week.
See you then. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.